Another charity dinner where my wife can embarrass our family name, Daniel quipped, adjusting his Armani tie in our bedroom mirror. Remember, darling, just smile and stay quiet when business comes up. I caught his smirk in the reflection as he added, "We all know how that ended last time." I maintained my practiced smile, carefully applying another coat of lipstick. The Williamson family dinner was tonight, an annual tradition where my husband's entire family gathered to celebrate their generations-old timber empire, the empire I secretly owned through a labyrinth of shell companies and investment trusts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'll try not to humiliate you, I replied softly, playing my part perfectly. The docile, clueless wife who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of business. The woman who'd supposedly failed at every career attempt before settling into the comfortable role of trophy wife to Daniel Williamson, heir apparent to Williamson Timber Industries. If only they knew. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace, my one acceptable family heirloom according to my mother-in-law, I mentally reviewed the quarterly reports from WTI that had arrived in my secure email that morning. Profit margins down 12%, another failed expansion into the Pacific Northwest, and concerning whispers about environmental violations the family was desperately trying to hide. All information Daniel believed was privy only to the Williamson inner circle. Mother says Uncle Richard is bringing his new girlfriend, Daniel continued, oblivious to my thoughts as he splashed on cologne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. 24 years old, a yoga instructor. He snorted. At least she won't try to give business advice like you did last Christmas. I winced internally at the memory, not because I'd been wrong, but because I'd allowed a small crack in my facade, suggesting that diversifying into sustainable forestry products might offset their declining timber revenues. The table had gone silent before erupting into condescending laughter, led by my father-in-law, Richard Williamson Sr. Poor Elise, he'd chuckled, patting my hand like a child's. Leave the business to those who understand it. Maybe focus on redecorating that lovely sunroom instead. That night, after returning home, I'd made 3 phone calls. Within 6 months, the sustainable forestry startup I'd recommended had secured major contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies, their stock soaring 340%. The Williamsons had missed their opportunity, exactly as I'd planned. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, Daniel called from the hallway. "Please don't keep everyone waiting like last time." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I slipped on my Louboutins, understated compared to what the Williamson women would wear. Another deliberate choice, and took one final look in the mirror. Alexandra Chen stared back at me, the woman who'd built Chen Innovations from nothing after watching her immigrant parents' small business get crushed by corporate predators. The woman who now controlled 17 companies through an intricate network of investment vehicles. The woman who had spent the last 5 years methodically acquiring the majority share of Williamson Timber Industries through offshore accounts and proxy investors. But tonight, I would be Elise Williamson, the disappointing wife who couldn't tell hardwood from softwood, the family joke who'd once worked as, heaven forbid, a retail manager before marrying into money. "Coming, dear," I called back, the perfect picture of wifely accommodation. The Williamson estate sprawled across 30 acres of prime real estate overlooking the city skyline. Built 3 generations ago when the timber business was booming, it remained a monument to old money and older prejudices. As our car crunched along the gravel driveway, I spotted the familiar line of luxury vehicles. Richard Jr.'s Bentley, Sophia's Range Rover, Thomas's Maserati, the Williamson siblings announcing their importance through German engineering and Italian design. Daniel's hand found my knee, squeezing a little too hard. "Remember what we talked about," he murmured, as the car stopped. Mother's been stressed about the company's quarterly numbers. No questions about business tonight. Of course, I replied, the perfect picture of submission. The butler, they actually maintained a full-time butler in 2025, greeted us at the door with practiced deference. Mr. and Mrs. Williamson, he intoned, taking our coats. I caught his subtle glance of pity. Even the staff knew my position in the family hierarchy. The grand foyer echoed with voices from the drawing room, crystal glasses tinkling and forced laughter bouncing off marble floors. I straightened my shoulders, sliding into character like putting on a comfortable disguise. Tonight was particularly important. The final reconnaissance before I executed the last phase of my plan. Daniel. Elise. Finally, Eleanor Williamson, the family matriarch, glided toward us in a cloud of expensive perfume and subtle disapproval. Everyone's been here for almost half an hour. Traffic, Mother, Daniel offered, kissing her powdered cheek. You look wonderful, Elise, she acknowledged with a curt nod, her eyes sweeping over my conservative black dress. I see you're still favoring simplicity. Less is more, as they say, I replied with a humble smile, knowing my understated Chanel would infuriate her more than any flashy alternative. Eleanor's definition of class remained firmly rooted in conspicuous consumption. The more obvious the wealth, the better. Well, come in, come in. Richard's brought his new friend, and Thomas has news about the Milwaukee acquisition. The drawing. Room presented the usual tableau of Williamson family dynamics. Richard Sr., the CEO and family patriarch, holding court by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand. His three sons, Richard Jr., Thomas, and my husband Daniel, positioned strategically around him like planets orbiting a fading sun. Their wives formed a separate constellation near the windows, diamonds glittering as they compared recent cosmetic procedures in whispered tones. Richard's new girlfriend stood awkwardly between worlds, too young for the wives' circle, too female for the men's. And then there were the cousins, second-tier Williamsons who held minor positions in the family. Business, always eager to please, always afraid of losing their precarious status. Elise, Richard Sr. boomed when he spotted me, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for addressing children and incompetent adults. Come give your father-in-law a kiss. How's the charity planning going? Daniel says you're organizing some sort of garden party? Children's Hospital fundraiser, I corrected gently, allowing him to pat my cheek condescendingly. Just a small event. In reality, the small event had secured over $3 million in pledges from some of the city's most influential business leaders, connections I was carefully cultivating for reasons the Williamsons couldn't begin to imagine. Good. Women's. Work suits you better than all those job interviews Daniel said you used to go on. He chuckled, raising his voice deliberately so the entire room could hear. Remember when she thought she could work in finance, Danny boy? What was that bank that turned you down? 3 interviews and they still passed. The room rippled with polite laughter. Daniel joined in, his hand squeezing my waist in warning to take the joke gracefully. First National, I supplied with a self-deprecating smile. Apparently, analyzing market trends isn't my strength. More laughter, the family relieved I was playing along. What Richard Sr. didn't know was that I hadn't been rejected by First National. I had been conducting due diligence on their investment practices before my firm acquired a controlling interest. The interviews had been meetings with their executive team, cleverly disguised through intermediaries. The bank now managed a significant portion of my personal portfolio, with Daniel none the wiser. Drinks before dinner, everyone. Eleanor announced, saving me from further reminiscence about my fictional failures. Thomas was just telling us about the Milwaukee property. As the family migrated toward the dining room, I carefully positioned myself near Thomas and Richard Jr., who had their heads together in serious conversation. Can't afford another failure, Thomas was saying, his voice low with tension. Dad doesn't know how bad the numbers really are. The environmental survey comes back next week, Richard Jr. replied. If it's as bad as legal thinks, we're looking at fines that could cripple the Eastern Division. Keep your voices down, Daniel hissed, joining them and noticing me hovering nearby. Elise, shouldn't you be helping Mother with something? I nodded apologetically and drifted away, but not before hearing Thomas mutter, not like she'd understand anyway. Remember her brilliant sustainable forestry idea? We'd be bankrupt if we'd listened to that nonsense. Little did he know that Chen, Innovation's Sustainable Forestry Division, had just secured a $50 million government contract using the exact approach I'd suggested at last year's Christmas dinner. Dinner at the Williamson estate was always a performance of wealth and tradition. Silver that required weekly polishing, china so delicate it seemed to resent holding actual food, and conversation carefully orchestrated to reinforce family mythology. Eleanor presided at one end of the mahogany table that could comfortably seat 20, Richard Sr. at the other, with family members arranged in strict order of importance. As Daniel's wife, and the only in-law without a prestigious family name, or independent wealth, I was seated at maximum distance from both power positions, between Thomas's son Ethan, a college dropout working nominally in the company's marketing department, and Richard's young girlfriend Amber, who looked as uncomfortable as I pretended to be. So, what do you do? Amber whispered to me as the first course was served by silent staff. Everyone's talking business and I have no idea what's happening. I smiled sympathetically. Mostly charity work now. The Williamsons prefer their wives to focus on social obligations. Oh. She glanced down the table at Richard Sr., who was gesturing emphatically about something to his sons. That's traditional. Very. The company has been family-run for 4 generations, I explained, keeping my voice appropriately reverent. Williamson men running the business, Williamson women running the households. Sounds boring, she said, then immediately looked horrified at her candor. I mean, not if you're into that kind of thing. I suppressed a genuine smile. It has its moments. From the head of the table, Richard Sr. called for attention, tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. Before we properly begin, I want to toast to family and to Williamson Timber's continuing legacy. He raised his glass. Despite some challenges this quarter, we remain strong. The Milwaukee acquisition will turn things around. To Williamson. Timber, the family echoed dutifully, raising glasses. And while we're making announcements, Eleanor added, I'm pleased to say that Daniel has been named the new Chief Strategy Officer. Richard and Thomas will continue as COO and CFO respectively, ensuring the company stays in capable Williamson hands for generations to come. The table erupted in congratulations. Daniel beamed, accepting backslaps and handshakes from his brothers. No one looked in my direction for a reaction. I haven't told Elise yet, Daniel announced, finally glancing toward me. Wanted it to be a surprise. Not that she follows all the corporate reshuffling. He chuckled indulgently. Too busy with her flower arrangements and charity luncheons. Congratulations, Daniel, I said warmly, raising my water glass. What a wonderful surprise. And it was, though not for the reasons he imagined. The promotion was the final piece I needed, positioning Daniel perfectly for what was to come. We should acknowledge the elephant in the room, Richard Jr. said. Suddenly his face flushed from too much wine. The Eastwood bid. We lost it yesterday to some upstart investment firm. $10 million in potential contracts gone. The table grew silent. Richard Sr.'s face darkened. We're not discussing business failures at the dinner table, Richard. We should be discussing them somewhere, Thomas muttered. Chen Innovations came out of nowhere with a better proposal and undercut us by 12%. And their environmental compliance record made ours look prehistoric. I took a small sip of water, keeping my expression neutral. Chen Innovations, My company, though no one at this table knew that, had indeed secured the Eastwood contract yesterday. The Williamsons had been so confident in their bid that they hadn't bothered to properly research their competition. "Maybe Elise has some business advice for us," Richard Jr. joked, turning attention to me as a convenient target. "Since her brilliant forestry ideas worked out so well last time." Eleanor tittered nervously. "Don't be absurd, Richard. Elise has other talents. She organized that lovely garden party for the Historical Society in June. The flower arrangements were creative." No, I'm curious," Richard Jr. persisted, the alcohol making him mean. "Elise, what would you do to save the family business from these corporate raiders stealing our contracts? Perhaps some more sustainable forestry initiatives?" He made air quotes around sustainable, drawing laughs from around the table. Daniel shot his brother a warning look, but didn't defend me. He never did. I hesitated, playing my role of intimidated outsider while carefully considering my response. This was a delicate moment. I needed to maintain my facade while planting certain seeds. "I wouldn't presume to understand the complexities of your business," I began softly, eyes downcast. "But as an outsider, sometimes I wonder if diversification might help buffer against industry-specific downturns." Richard Sr. barked out a laugh. "Diversification? The woman reads a business magazine once and thinks she's Warren Buffett." "What kind of diversification, Elise?" Thomas asked, with exaggerated patience, playing along. "Should we start selling timber-scented candles? Williamson timber gift shops?" More laughter rippled around the table. Even the family members who didn't work for the company joined in, eager to align themselves with the power center. I allowed myself to blush, the picture of embarrassment. "Perhaps I've overstepped. It's just that I read about some timber companies expanding into sustainable building materials, engineered wood products that actually command premium prices while using less raw timber." "Exactly what we need," Richard Jr. sneered. "Business advice from a woman who couldn't even get hired as a bank teller." "It was a financial analyst position, actually," I corrected gently, then immediately looked contrite, as if regretting the clarification. "The point is," Daniel interjected, his tone making it clear he was rescuing me from myself, "Elise doesn't need to worry about business matters. That's why she married a Williamson." He raised his glass again. "To knowing your place in the world." "To knowing your place," the family echoed, laughing. I joined the toast with a tremulous smile, the perfect picture of a properly chastised wife. Inside, I was reviewing the documents my legal team had finalized that morning, the ones that would activate my majority ownership of Williamson Timber Industries and install an entirely new board of directors. The papers awaiting signature that would remove the Williamson family from operational control of the company they thought was their birthright. Just 72 hours from now, they would learn what knowing your place truly meant. The dinner continued, with the usual Williamson dynamics. Richard Sr. holding forth on politics, Eleanor critiquing everyone's children, the siblings competing for parental approval, and the cousins desperately trying to secure their positions in the family hierarchy. I maintained my quiet, slightly intimidated demeanor, offering compliments on the food and asking appropriately vacuous questions about Eleanor's newest redecorating project. After dinner, the men predictably separated for brandies and business, talk in Richard Sr.'s study, while the women moved to the conservatory for coffee and gossip. I excused myself to use the powder room, taking a deliberately wrong turn down the hallway leading to Richard Sr.'s study. Outside the heavy oak door, I paused, listening to the raised voices within. "Cannot afford another quarter like this one," Thomas was saying urgently. "The bank is already questioning our latest loan extension." "That Chen woman is becoming a real problem," Richard Jr. added. "First the Eastwood contract, now I hear she's approaching the Hendersons about their lumber supply." "The Hendersons have been with us for 50 years, Richard Sr. dismissed. "They wouldn't dare." "They already did. Daniel's voice now, tense with frustration. Signed with Chen yesterday. 20% better terms and some nonsense about carbon-neutral supply chains that the younger Henderson is obsessed with. Who is this Chen anyway? Richard Sr. demanded. Where did she come from? Alexandra Chen, Thomas replied. Built Chen Innovations from nothing about 10 years ago. Very private. Doesn't do interviews, no public photos. Some kind of tech background originally. But she's expanded aggressively into sustainable forestry and building materials. Using our playbook against us, Richard Jr. growled. Stealing our clients, our contracts. There's something not right about how fast she's moving into our territory. We need to send a message, Richard Sr. declared, his tone hardening. Thomas, talk to our friends at the Department of Environmental Protection. See if they can find something in Chen's operations worth investigating. Already tried, Thomas admitted. Her compliance record is spotless, unlike ours. A heavy silence followed. How bad is it? Richard Sr. finally asked. The Wellington Tract violations could cost us 7 figures in fines if they find everything, Thomas admitted. And there's the worker safety issues at the Millfield processing plant. Christ, Richard Sr. muttered. Daniel, your new promotion comes with new responsibilities. I need you to handle this Chen woman. Find her weakness. Everyone has one. I'll take care of it, Dad, Daniel assured him, his voice taking on that eager-to-please tone he always used with his father. I retreated silently down the hallway, a small smile playing at my lips. Let them investigate Alexandra Chen. They would find nothing but a carefully constructed corporate identity, a woman who appeared in board meetings exclusively via secure video calls, whose few public photos were strategically obscured. They had no idea that Alexandra Chen was currently listening to their desperate plotting while wearing a conservative black dress at their family dinner. In the powder room, I checked my appearance, ensuring my mask of submission remained intact. My phone buzzed discreetly in my clutch. A message from Sarah, my most trusted executive and one of the few people who knew my dual identities. Final documents prepared. Board meeting confirmed for Thursday, 9 a.m. All investors aligned. I deleted the message immediately. Thursday morning, while Daniel would be strutting into his first executive meeting as Chief Strategy Officer, I would be activating my controlling interest in Williamson Timber and removing the entire family from operational control. By lunchtime, the 4 generations of Williamson leadership would be nothing but a page in the company history. Rejoining the women in the conservatory, I found Eleanor holding court about the upcoming charity season. Elise, there you are, she said with faint disapproval at my absence. We were just discussing the hospital fundraiser. I've taken the liberty of revising your guest list. Several of the names you included aren't appropriate for a Williamson event. I nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Eleanor. Your guidance is always helpful. The inappropriate guests had been carefully selected tech industry leaders and sustainable business advocates, people whose connections would be valuable to me after Thursday's revelations. Eleanor had predictably removed them in favor of the same old money families the Williamsons had been entertaining for generations. We were also discussing Sophia's renovation plans, Eleanor continued, gesturing to Richard Jr.'s wife. She's finally updating that ghastly kitchen in their lake house. It's costing a fortune, Sophia complained happily. But Richard says I deserve the best. Italian marble, custom cabinetry, imported appliances, everything top of the line. I made appropriately impressed noises while mentally calculating how soon Sophia would have to list that lake house for sale. The financial records I'd reviewed showed Richard Jr. had leveraged himself to the hilt, using inflated company stock as collateral for personal loans. When the stock crashed on Thursday, his financial house of cards would collapse spectacularly. The evening dragged on predictably. The men eventually rejoined the women, smelling of expensive cigars and brandy, their business discussion having apparently bolstered their confidence. Daniel swaggered slightly as he approached, resting his hand possessively on my shoulder. "Ready to leave, darling? Some of us have important work in the morning." "Of course," I murmured, rising gracefully. "Thank you for a lovely evening, Eleanor." The dinner was wonderful. Eleanor accepted my gratitude with a regal nod. "Daniel, don't forget the board meeting Thursday, 9 o'clock sharp. Your father wants all three of you there for the quarterly presentation." "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel assured her, already guiding me toward the door. "It's going to be a memorable meeting." If only he knew how memorable. In the car ride home, Daniel was uncharacteristically animated, the promotion and family approval energizing him. "Did you see Dad's face when he announced my promotion? He's finally recognizing my potential." "I'm so proud of you," I said, the perfect supportive wife. "Chief Strategy Officer sounds very important." "It is important, Elise," he said, his condescension returning. "Not that you'd understand the complexities, but this puts me in line for CEO when Dad retires. Richard and Thomas are furious." He chuckled, pleased with himself. "They never thought I'd outmaneuver them." I made appropriately impressed noises while he continued expounding on his new importance. The irony was almost too perfect. Daniel's promotion was indeed part of a strategic plan, just not the one he imagined. I had carefully cultivated certain board members for months, subtly suggesting Daniel's promotion would bring fresh perspectives to the stagnating company. They had convinced Richard Sr. it was his own idea. "We should celebrate," Daniel declared as we arrived home, already loosening his tie. "Get a bottle of champagne." While he went upstairs to change, I retrieved a bottle from our wine cellar, one of the rare Krug vintages I kept for special occasions. Daniel, who fancied himself a wine connoisseur despite having little actual knowledge, wouldn't recognize that it cost more than his monthly car payment. In our kitchen, I carefully opened the champagne while reviewing my mental checklist for Thursday. The legal team was prepared, the financial transfers arranged, the press releases drafted. 5 years of careful planning were about to culminate in one perfect moment of revelation. "To the new Chief Strategy Officer," I toasted when Daniel returned, handing him a crystal flute. "And to leaving that tiresome family dinner behind for another year," he added, clinking his glass against mine. "Though I must say, you behaved yourself better than usual. Hardly any embarrassing business suggestions." He laughed, taking a long drink. "God, Richard's face when you mentioned diversification, priceless." I smiled thinly. I was just trying to contribute to the conversation. "That's the thing, Elise. You don't need to contribute. No one expects it." He drained his glass, immediately pouring another. "That's what I love about you. You're decorative, not functional." He laughed at his own joke. "In the business sense, I mean." "Of course," I murmured, sipping my champagne slowly. "I know my limitations." "Exactly," Daniel exclaimed, already slightly flushed from the alcohol. "Self-awareness is attractive in a woman, not like that Chen woman everyone's so worried about." Dad's right. We'll find her weakness. Everyone has one. "What will you do?" I asked, genuinely curious about what strategy he might attempt. "Against this competitor?" Daniel waved dismissively. "Corporate espionage, probably. Thomas knows people who can dig up dirt on anyone. Or maybe we'll just acquire her company and shut it down. Hostile takeover. That would teach her to compete with Williamson's." I suppressed a smile at the irony. "Sounds effective." "It's business, Elise. Ruthless but necessary." He yawned suddenly, the long day in Champagne catching up with him. "I need sleep. Big strategy meeting tomorrow before Thursday's board presentation." As he headed upstairs, I remained in the kitchen, reviewing the details of my plan one final time. Daniel's casual cruelty and his family's collective condescension had long ceased to sting. They had become merely data points, evidence justifying what I was about to do. I thought back to our first meeting 6 years ago, at a charity auction, where I'd been carefully researching the Williamson family dynamics. Daniel had seemed different then. Charming, attentive, genuinely interested in my opinions. That facade had lasted precisely until the wedding ring was on my finger. Within months, he'd begun the systematic belittling that I now recognized as his standard operating procedure. What he never suspected was that I had chosen him deliberately, identified him as the Williamson most susceptible to flattery, most desperate for validation outside his family. While dating, I had played the successful but not threatening small business owner, the woman impressed by his family name, but not quite grasping the full scope of their influence. After marriage, I had gradually allowed my business to fail, fulfilling his expectation that I would become dependent on his success. All while Alexandra Chen continued acquiring Williamson timber stock through a complex network of shell companies and investment vehicles. I checked my secure phone one last time before bed. Another message from Sarah. Final shareholding secured. 51.3% ownership confirmed. Legal team standing by for Thursday activation. Upstairs, Daniel was already asleep, snoring slightly, blissfully unaware that in less than 72 hours, his family's entire world would implode. His new title of Chief Strategy Officer would last exactly 2 more days. I slipped into bed beside him, closing my eyes and allowing myself a small smile in the darkness. After 5 years of careful planning, of enduring family dinners filled with mockery and condescension, of being the family joke, Thursday morning would bring a reckoning none of them could imagine. The Williamson empire was about to fall, and I would be there to catch each piece as it crumbled. Wednesday morning dawned with the crisp certainty of inevitable change. I woke before Daniel, watching him sleep with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Tomorrow would change everything. But today was for final preparations. I slipped out of bed silently, dressed in my running clothes, and headed out for my daily 5-mile route. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, each footfall on the pavement a rhythmic countdown to tomorrow's revelation. By the time I returned, Daniel was already in the shower, singing tunelessly about being king of the world. "Morning workout?" he asked absently as I entered the bathroom, not really interested in the answer. "I've got that strategy meeting this morning. Don't wait up tonight, the team's taking me out to celebrate the promotion." "Enjoy yourself," I replied, mentally calculating how much he would drink, which overpriced steakhouse they would choose, how many meaningless toasts would be raised to his illusory future. "You deserve it," he beamed, mistaking my statement for genuine admiration rather than an acknowledgement of the karmic retribution heading his way. "That's my girl. Hey, wear something nice tomorrow night. We'll go somewhere special after the board meeting. Once the quarterly numbers are official, there'll be a proper announcement about my promotion in the company newsletter." I nodded, already planning what I would actually be wearing tomorrow. Not for a celebratory dinner, but for my first in-person board meeting as the majority shareholder of Williamson Timber Industries. As Daniel left for work, briefcase in hand, and ego fully inflated, I retreated to my home office, a small room he believed I used for planning charity events and keeping household accounts. The moment the front door closed, I activated the hidden panel behind my bookshelf, revealing my actual workspace. 3 high-resolution monitors, a secure communication system, and biometric locks securing filing cabinets filled with 5 years of carefully gathered intelligence. Sarah's face appeared on my center screen the moment I sat down. "Good morning, Alexandra. Everything remains on schedule for tomorrow." "Any last-minute issues?" I asked, reviewing the documents displayed on the other screens. Legal filings ready for submission, press releases drafted in multiple variations depending on how tomorrow unfolded, contingency plans for various Williamson reactions. Nothing. Unexpected. The share transfer completion was confirmed overnight. The board members not affiliated with the family have been privately briefed. They'll side with us when the moment comes. Sarah paused, her expression reflecting the gravity of what we were about to do. The Williamsons still have no idea. Daniel was practically floating this morning, I confirmed. His father's appointed him Chief Strategy Officer, effective tomorrow. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The shortest executive tenure in corporate history. Has legal confirmed the employment contracts for afterward? The ones for family? Members who may wish to remain with the company under new management? All prepared, Sarah nodded. Though I doubt many will accept the terms. The organizational chart has them reporting through proper channels rather than exercising family privilege. Most won't accept the demotion. We'll see, I replied, thinking of specific Williamsons who might surprise us. Some necessity is a powerful motivator. What about the environmental compliance report? Worse than we anticipated. Sarah's expression turned serious. The violations at the Wellington tract alone could trigger fines of up to $12 million. We've prepared a remediation plan to submit immediately after takeover, which should mitigate some of the penalties. I nodded, making a note. And the financial audit? Complete. As suspected, significant creative accounting over the past 3 years. The company's actual position is considerably weaker than what they'll present to the board tomorrow. This didn't surprise me. I'd been tracking the Williamsons' financial manipulations for years. What had begun as an exercise in corporate intelligence, gathering had evolved into a comprehensive map of their malfeasance. Environmental violations covered up, safety regulations ignored, financial statements massaged to hide declining performance. Each discovery had only strengthened my resolve to take control of the company, not just for personal satisfaction, but because the Williamsons were driving a once great organization into the ground through arrogance and incompetence. The courier will deliver the final paperwork at 8:30 tomorrow morning, Sarah continued. I'll meet you at the office at 8 UR to prepare. Legal team standing by from 7 a.m. Perfect. I closed the secure connection and leaned back in my chair, mentally reviewing every detail of tomorrow's plan. 5 years of careful work culminating in a single moment of revelation. I had accounted for every variable except one. How would it feel to finally show the Williamsons exactly who I was? My phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. Daniel mentioned your charity event next month. I'm taking over planning. Your last attempt was embarrassingly provincial. Sending you my guest list and vendor contacts. Use them. I smiled at the screen. Eleanor's micromanagement would soon be a quaint memory, rather than an ongoing irritation. I replied with appropriately grateful submissiveness, knowing it would be the last time I would ever have to do so. The day passed in a blur of final preparations. I scheduled meetings with key executives who would need to be immediately briefed after tomorrow's takeover. I reviewed personnel files of Williamson family members employed throughout the company, evaluating which ones might have actual skills worth retaining and which were merely collecting paychecks based on their last name. I finalized the press strategy with our media team, carefully framing the takeover as a necessary corporate restructuring rather than the personal reckoning it partly was. By evening, everything was in place. I changed into workout clothes and headed to my regular Wednesday evening yoga class, a habit Daniel mocked as New Age nonsense, but which provided me with both physical centering and a perfect alibi. While I moved through familiar poses, focusing on breath and balance, Daniel and his colleagues were celebrating at Morton's Steakhouse downtown, running up a 5-figure tab on the corporate account and toasting their illusory futures. My instructor approached as class ended. Your energy seems different today, Elise. Lighter somehow. I smiled, thinking how appropriate her observation was. I'm on the verge of a significant life change. Everything's about to shift. Whatever it is, I hope it brings you peace, she replied, unaware of just how seismic tomorrow's shift would be. When I returned home, the house was still empty. Daniel had texted that the celebration was moving to the Skyline Club for after-dinner drinks with some potential clients. Translation: he would stagger home after midnight, reeking of whiskey and self-importance. Perfect. I needed the evening alone for final mental preparation. I ran a bath, adding the expensive salts Daniel had given me last Christmas, his secretary's choice, not his, and sank into the warm water with a glass of wine. Tomorrow would require absolute clarity and precision. Each word, each gesture would need to convey exactly the right message as I transformed from Elise Williamson, decorative wife, to Alexandra Chen, corporate conqueror. My secure phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. A message from our surveillance team, Subject D and Associates closing tab at Skyline. Estimated arrival home 45 minutes. I finished my bath, dried off, and changed into simple silk pajamas. When Daniel stumbled through the door 20 minutes later, I was in bed reading a novel, specifically, the kind of light women's fiction he assumed was the limit of my literary capacity. "Elish," he slurred, attempting to loosen his tie and remove his shoes simultaneously. "You should have been there. Everyone's so happy about my promotion. Dad called, said he's proud of me." He collapsed, onto the bed, still mostly dressed. "Gonna change everything tomorrow. Show 'em all what Daniel Williamson can do." "I'm sure you will, dear," I murmured, setting my book aside. "Do you need help with your shoes?" He mumbled something incoherent as I carefully removed his Italian leather Oxfords, then his suit jacket. He wouldn't remember this in the morning, wouldn't remember declaring that tomorrow would change everything. The dramatic irony was almost too perfect. "Meetings at 9, he muttered as he drifted toward unconsciousness. "Gonna show those board members my vision for the company. Strategic innovations." "Sleep well," I whispered as his breathing deepened into snores. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." I turned off the light and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through tomorrow's carefully orchestrated sequence of events. The timing had to be flawless, the execution precise. In less than 12 hours, the Williamson family's century-old control of Williamson Timber Industries would end, not with a dramatic corporate raid or hostile takeover bid, but with the quiet submission of legal documents by the woman they had systematically underestimated for years. I allowed myself a small smile in the darkness. Sometimes revenge wasn't about dramatic confrontations or public humiliations. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge was simply showing people exactly who you were after they had decided they knew all there was to know about you. Tomorrow, the Williamsons would finally meet Alexandra Chen, and they would never forget her. Daniels. Alarm blared at 6:30 a.m. He groaned, rolling over to slap at his phone before clutching his head. "God, I feel terrible," he mumbled. "Why did you let me drink so much?" "I wasn't there, remember?" I replied mildly, already awake and mentally preparing for the day ahead. Big celebration for the new chief strategy officer. Right. He sat up gingerly. "Huge day today. Board meeting at 9. He squinted at me suspiciously. "Why are you so chipper?" "Just excited for you," I replied, sliding out of bed. "I'll make coffee, strong coffee." In the kitchen, I prepared Daniel's usual breakfast. Black coffee, 2 pieces of toast, nothing that would upset his sensitive stomach after a night of overindulgence. I checked my secure phone while the coffee brewed. All systems go. Legal. Team in place. Sarah and executive team standing by. When Daniel shuffled into the kitchen 15 minutes later, showered but still pale, I had his breakfast waiting and his favorite power tie, the red Hermes he believed brought him luck, laid out beside his plate. "You're being unusually helpful," he observed suspiciously, gulping coffee. "It's an important day for you," I replied with a smile. "For us." He nodded, his ego soothed by what he perceived as wifely support. "I should be back by 6. Make reservations. Somewhere special for tonight. Le Bernardin, maybe." "I'll take care of everything," I assured him, mentally noting that by 6 p.m. dining reservations would be the least of his concerns. Good luck today. He grabbed his briefcase, straightened his lucky tie, and headed for the door with renewed confidence. The Williamson era is just beginning, Elise. Dad's finally seeing my potential. This is what I've worked for my whole life. The moment the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I changed quickly into the outfit I'd selected for today's revelation. Not the conservative dresses Daniel preferred, but a precisely tailored Armani suit in charcoal gray with subtle power pinstripes. Professional, authoritative, unmistakably in charge. My driver was already waiting when I emerged from the house. Not the car service Daniel believed I occasionally used for shopping trips, but my regular security detail in an armored luxury sedan. As we pulled away from the house that had been my gilded cage for 5 years, I felt a sense of liberation washing over me. After today, no more pretense, no more strategic submission, no more Elise Williamson, decorative wife. We'll arrive at 7:45, my driver confirmed, navigating through morning traffic. Security team has established the perimeter. Sarah is already on site. I spent the drive reviewing final details on my tablet. At 7:30, a message appeared. Courier delivered final. Documentation to legal team. All papers in order. At exactly 7:45, we pulled into the private underground garage of the Williamson Timber Industries headquarters, a sprawling office complex downtown that had been the company's base of operations for 3 generations. The EI security team met us at the entrance, escorting me to a private elevator that would take us to the executive floor's conference room adjacent to the main boardroom. Sarah was waiting, impeccably dressed and radiating calm efficiency. Everything's ready, she confirmed as I entered. The family members are all arriving. Daniel just pulled in downstairs. On the monitor, I watched as Daniel strode through the lobby, accepting congratulations from employees who had already heard about his promotion. His hangover appeared forgotten, replaced by the strutting confidence of a man who believed his birthright was finally being recognized. Richard Sr. and Eleanor have arrived, Sarah reported, checking another monitor. Thomas and Richard Jr. right behind them, several cousins in the lobby. The non-family board members are assembling in the small conference room as requested. I nodded, mentally switching gears from Elise to Alexandra. The transition felt like shedding an uncomfortable costume I'd worn too long. It's time. Begin the sequence. Sarah made a call. Initiate Protocol Timber. Protocol Timber, named with deliberate irony, was the activation code for our carefully orchestrated takeover plan. Within seconds, our legal team would be electronically filing the ownership declarations with the SEC. Our security team would be moving into position throughout the building. Our IT specialists would be locking down the company's systems to prevent any desperate data deletion or sabotage. Family members are gathering in the boardroom, Sarah reported, watching the monitors. Richard Sr. appears to be giving some kind of pep talk. Daniel is standing right beside him. I checked my appearance one final time in the conference room's mirror. My hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, professional and severe. My makeup was subtle but flawless. The Armani suit projected power without ostentation. Around my neck, I wore my grandmother's jade pendant, the one family heirloom that connected me to my true heritage, the one I had never worn in the Williamsons. Presents because Eleanor had once called it ethnic trinketry. Ownership filings confirmed, Sarah announced. We are officially on record as the majority shareholder of Williamson Timber Industries. Legal control activated. I took a deep breath. 5 years of planning. 5 years of enduring the Williamsons' casual cruelty and systemic underestimation. 5 years of being invisible when I had suggestions, decorative when they needed social validation, and a convenient target when they needed someone to mock. It's time, I said, moving toward the door that connected directly to the boardroom. Stay close, but let me handle this first part alone. Sarah nodded, taking her position slightly behind me. The non-family board members have been notified. They're entering from the other door now. I could hear Richard Sr.'s voice through the door, pompous and self-assured as always. Finest quarter in the company's history, thanks to the hard work of the Williamson men in this room. Daniel's promotion to Chief Strategy Officer marks a new era of... I opened the door and stepped into the boardroom. The sudden silence was absolute. Every head turned toward me. The unfamiliar woman in an expensive suit entering through a side door normally kept locked. Richard Sr. froze mid-sentence, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance at the interruption. "Excuse me," he began stiffly, "but this is a private board meeting. How did you—" His words died as Daniel lurched to his feet, recognition dawning on his face. "Elise, what the hell are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" I smiled. Not the placating smile of Elise Williamson, but the confident smile of Alexandra Chen, CEO and majority shareholder. "Hello, Daniel, Richard, everyone. Please don't let me interrupt, though I believe the agenda has changed somewhat." "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor demanded from her seat near Richard Sr. Though not officially a board member, she attended every meeting as the family matriarch. "Daniel, control your wife. This is completely inappropriate." "I'm afraid Daniel won't be controlling anything anymore," I replied calmly, moving to the head of the table where Richard Sr. stood. Least of all me. The non-family board members were filing in through the main door now, 6 sober-faced men, and women who had been privately briefed on what was about to happen. They took their seats silently, watching the unfolding drama with professional detachment. "If someone doesn't explain what's happening right now," Richard Sr. blustered, his face reddening, "I'll have security remove you immediately." I placed my leather portfolio on the table, extracting a single document and sliding it toward him. "This might help clarify the situation. It's a declaration of majority ownership of Williamson Timber Industries, filed with the SEC approximately 10 minutes ago." Richard Sr. stared at the document without touching it. "What kind of joke is this?" "Not a joke, Richard. A corporate restructuring." I gestured to Sarah, who began distributing identical documents to each person at the table. "Effective immediately, I control 51.3% of Williamson Timber Industries' voting shares. I've called this emergency board meeting to announce changes to the company's leadership structure." The room erupted in overlapping voices. "This is impossible. Who does she think she—" "Daniel, what the hell is your wife?" Daniel stood frozen, his face ashen as he stared at the document in front of him. "Elise, what have you done?" "First," I continued calmly over the chaos, "I should clarify something. My name is not Elise Williamson. At least, that's not my only name." I waited until the room quieted, all eyes fixed on me in stunned disbelief. "I'm Alexandra Chen, founder and CEO of Chen Innovations, and as of today, the controlling shareholder of this company." The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum of comprehension as the Williamson family collectively tried to process what I was saying. It was Thomas who understood first, his financial acumen allowing him to connect the dots faster than his relatives. "Chen," he whispered, staring at me with dawning horror. "You're that Chen? The one who's been taking your contracts? Acquiring your suppliers? Offering your clients better terms?" "Yes." I nodded, acknowledging his realization. "That's been me all along." Daniel lunged across the table toward me, his face contorted with rage and betrayal. "You lying bitch! You've been spying on us, using me to get company information?" 2 security officers materialized instantly, restraining him before he could reach me. I hadn't flinched. "I never needed to spy, Daniel," I said quietly. "You and your family shared everything willingly. At dinner parties, at family gatherings, over drinks with friends. You never considered for a moment that your decorative wife might understand what you were saying? Might be recording every detail of your corporate malfeasance and environmental violations for future reference. Richard Sr. had recovered enough to attempt reasserting control. This is preposterous. The family owns the controlling interest in this company, has for 100 years. Whatever documents you've fabricated won't stand up to legal scrutiny. Sarah stepped forward, tablet in hand. Mr. Williamson, we've prepared a complete ownership trace showing exactly how Ms. Chen acquired her majority stake. Beginning 5 years ago with purchases through various investment vehicles, continuing through strategic acquisitions of institutional investors' positions, and concluding with last week's purchase of the Harrington family's 7% stake, which I believe you were attempting to secure for Daniel's portfolio. Richard Jr. slammed his fist on the table. This is corporate espionage, fraud. We'll have this overturned by lunchtime. Actually, one of the non-family board members interjected, I've reviewed the documentation with our corporate counsel. The share acquisitions appear entirely legitimate. Ms. Chen has methodically and legally acquired her position through open market transactions over a 5-year period. 5 years, Daniel repeated, his voice hollow as he stared at me. Since right after we married. This was your plan all along. I met his gaze steadily. Not initially, no. When we met, I was simply researching potential acquisition targets. Williamson Timber had potential, but suffered from outdated practices and resistance to innovation. I wanted to understand the company culture before making any moves. So you seduced my son as corporate research? Eleanor spat, her aristocratic composure crumbling. I attended a charity function where I knew the Williamson family would be present, I corrected. Daniel approached me. He was charming, attentive, interested in my opinions. I turned back to him. At least until we were married. Then the real Daniel Williamson emerged, the one who needed a decorative wife who wouldn't challenge his intellect or threaten his ego. The one who joined his family in systematically belittling and underestimating me at every opportunity. Daniel's face flushed. That's not, you never. Last Christmas dinner, I interrupted. When I suggested diversifying into sustainable forestry products. What did your father say, Daniel? That I should leave business to those who understand it and focus on redecorating the sunroom instead? And you laughed. You all laughed. No one spoke. The memory hung in the air between us. 2 days ago, at the family dinner, I continued, Richard Jr. asked if I had business advice since my brilliant forestry ideas worked out so well last time. More laughter. More mockery. I looked around the table, meeting each Williamson's eyes in turn. None of you ever bothered to learn that before I became Elise Williamson, I was Alexandra Chen, MIT graduate with dual degrees in environmental engineering and business, founder of a technology company that pivoted into sustainable resource management and named one of Business Week's 40 under 40 most promising entrepreneurs. This is insane, Thomas muttered, still processing. You've been living a double life for 5 years? Running a competing company while married to Daniel? How is that even possible? Careful delegation, excellent executive team, strategic use. Of video conferencing and digital signatures, I smiled slightly. And a husband who never once asked about my day or showed any interest in my activities beyond whether dinner would be ready on time. Richard Sr. had regained some of his composure, his business instincts finally kicking in. What do you want? A board seat? Higher dividends? Because if this is a negotiating tactic, this isn't a negotiation, Richard. It's a notification. I opened my portfolio again, removing another document. The second item on today's agenda is the restructuring of the company's executive team, effective immediately. All family members currently holding C-suite positions are being removed. The room exploded again, voices overlapping in outrage and disbelief. I waited for the initial wave to subside before continuing. Richard Williamson, Sr., Thomas Williamson, Richard Williamson Jr., and Daniel Williamson are all removed from their respective positions. The board will vote momentarily on my appointment as CEO, with Sarah Lynn as COO and Marcus Jeffries as CFO. You can't do this, Richard Sr. growled, his hands shaking with rage. This company has been in the Williamson family for generations. And you've nearly run it into the ground through mismanagement, environmental violations, and resistance to innovation, I replied evenly. The third agenda item addresses the company's precarious financial position, the real position, not the creatively accounted version you plan to present today. Sarah distributed another set of documents, these containing the results of our forensic accounting investigation. The non-family board members began reviewing them immediately, their expressions growing increasingly grave. These environmental violations, one of them said, looking up from the report. Are these figures accurate? Potential fines of $12 million? Unfortunately, yes, I confirmed. The company has been cutting corners on environmental compliance for years. My team has already prepared a remediation plan and voluntary disclosure strategy that should mitigate some of the penalties. And the Milwaukee acquisition? Another board member asked. The projections presented last quarter were wildly optimistic, I finished for him, based on timber yield estimates that internal documents show the management team knew were impossible to achieve. The actual projected return is detailed on page 7. As the board members continued reviewing the documents, the Williamson family sat in stunned silence. Daniel stared at me as if seeing a stranger, which in many ways he was. For 5 years, he had been married to a carefully constructed facade, a woman designed to match his expectations while revealing nothing of her true self. Why? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. Why go through all this? If this was about business, about the company, why the marriage? Why the deception? I considered his question carefully. The complete truth was complex, a mixture of business strategy, personal vendetta, and evolutionary self-protection that had developed over time. But Daniel deserved at least a partial answer. It began as business, I acknowledged. A thorough approach to understanding a potential acquisition target. But then I experienced firsthand how the Williamson family operates, the casual cruelty, the systematic belittling of anyone perceived as lesser, the entitled assumption that the rules don't apply to you. I looked around the table, meeting each family member's gaze. I watched you mock employees who suggested innovations. I saw you dismiss qualified women from consideration for promotions. I witnessed environmental regulations treated as optional, inconveniences rather than legal and moral obligations. My eyes returned to Daniel. And yes, I experienced personally how quickly a Williamson's attentiveness turns to contempt once they believe they've secured someone's loyalty. After our first year of marriage, you stopped even pretending to value my opinions or respect my intelligence. I became, in your words, decorative, not functional. Daniel flinched at hearing his own words quoted back to him. So yes, what began as business became somewhat personal. But this takeover isn't about revenge. It's about rescuing a company, with good bones and dedicated employees, from a management team driving it toward disaster through arrogance and outdated thinking. Richard Sr. had heard enough. He pushed back from the table, standing to his full imposing height. I won't sit here and listen to this. This hostile takeover will be challenged in court. The Williamson name still means something in this town. We have connections, resources. Dwindling resources, I corrected gently. Your personal finances are heavily leveraged against company stock that's about to drop significantly when the true state of affairs becomes public. As for connections, I shrugged. They're useful until they're not. The business community respects success more than sentiment. I turned to the non-family board members. I believe we're ready for the vote on the new executive appointments. Unless there are questions about the documentation provided? The senior independent director cleared his throat. These financial discrepancies and compliance issues are deeply concerning. The board has a fiduciary duty to shareholders that transcends family loyalty. He glanced apologetically at Richard Sr. before continuing. I move we proceed with the vote as proposed. Second, another board member agreed grimly. The vote was quick and decisive. With my controlling interest combined with the independent director's support, the result was a foregone conclusion. Within minutes, a century of Williamson leadership had been officially terminated. This concludes the emergency board meeting, I announced, gathering my documents. Sarah will distribute information about the transition process. Family members currently employed by the company should report to HR for individual meetings regarding their future roles. Future roles? Thomas scoffed. You can't possibly think any of us would work for you after this. That choice is yours, I replied calmly. Employment contracts have been prepared for family members who wish to remain with the company in positions appropriate to their actual qualifications and experience. Those who prefer to depart will receive standard severance packages. Nothing more, nothing less. We built this company, Richard Sr. declared, his voice shaking with emotion. You can't just erase 100 years of Williamson leadership. I'm not erasing anything, Richard. The company history will acknowledge the Williamson family's founding, role and century of leadership. But companies evolve or they die. Williamson Timber Industries will now evolve under new leadership. I nodded to the security team, who moved forward to escort the Williamson family members from the boardroom. As they began filing out, expressions ranging from shock to rage to devastation, I caught Daniel's arm gently. A word in private, please. He jerked away from my touch, but followed me into the adjacent conference room, security officers discreetly positioning themselves outside the door. When we were alone, Daniel stared at me as if I were a stranger, which, in many ways, I was. 5 years, he said hollowly. 5 years of lies. 5 years of showing you exactly what you wanted to see, I corrected. You never wanted a wife with opinions or ambitions or intelligence. You wanted decoration, so that's what I provided. The fault lies not in my performance, Daniel, but in what you valued. He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting its perfect arrangement. What happens now? To us? Divorce papers will be delivered to the house this afternoon. The prenuptial agreement you insisted upon works, largely in your favor. I have no interest in your personal assets. You can keep the house, the cars, the artwork you never really appreciated but bought, because your mother said it was appropriate for a Williamson residence. How generous, he said bitterly. And what will you tell people? That you married me, as part of a corporate espionage scheme? I'll tell no one anything about our private life, I replied. The official statement will simply announce that Alexandra Chen has assumed control of Williamson Timber Industries after acquiring majority ownership through legal market transactions. Your family's future public standing depends largely on how you all choose to behave from this point forward. Daniel laughed humorlessly. And if we choose to tell the world how you deceived us, lived a double life, used our family, you're welcome to try. I shrugged slightly. But consider how that narrative would sound. The mighty Williamsons, outsmarted for 5 years by a woman they openly mocked and underestimated. A woman whose business suggestions they laughed at while she built a competing company that now controls their family legacy. Is that really the story you want to tell? His shoulders slumped as the truth of my words sank in. The Williamson pride would never allow them to publicly admit how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. One last thing, I said, moving toward the door. The promotion to Chief Strategy Officer that you were so proud of? It was my suggestion. I had board members propose it to your father months ago, knowing it would position you perfectly for today's revelation. I paused, hand on the doorknob. You see, Daniel, I actually do understand strategy quite well. As I left him standing alone in the conference room, I felt no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, just the quiet relief of finally stepping fully into my true identity after years of strategic concealment. Alexandra Chen had reclaimed her life from Elise Williamson's careful performance. The real work was just beginning, a company to transform, employees to reassure, a new vision to implement. But first, I had family members to meet with individually, starting with those who actually possessed skills worth retaining. Because despite everything, this wasn't about destruction. It was about building something better from foundations that had grown dangerously unstable under generations of entitled management. The Williamson era had ended. The Chen era was just beginning. The executive floor of Williamson Timber Industries buzzed with barely contained chaos. News of the takeover had spread throughout the building with the speed and destructive force of a forest fire. Employees gathered, in small clusters, whispering frantically, their eyes darting nervously whenever someone in a suit walked past. Security personnel, my security personnel, maintained a visible presence at key access points, ensuring the transition proceeded without physical incident. In what had been Richard Sr.'s office until 2 hours ago, I sat at his imposing mahogany desk, reviewing personnel files as Sarah coordinated the day's remaining meetings. "Ethan Williamson is waiting," she informed me, tablet in hand. "Thomas's son, the one from marketing." I nodded, recalling the college dropout who held a nebulous director title despite having no discernible skills or responsibilities. "Send him in." Ethan entered with the awkward shuffle of someone who had never faced actual consequences. At family dinners, he typically spent most of his time sneaking glances at his phone or complaining about his father's refusal to increase his company car allowance. "Have a seat, Ethan," I gestured to the chair across from me. "I believe you know why you're here." "This is all pretty insane," he muttered, slouching into the chair. "Grandpa's having a complete meltdown. Dad's threatening lawsuits. Uncle Daniel?" He trailed off, evidently unsure how to categorize his uncle's husband's betrayal. "Your employment with Williamson Timber, now Chen Forestry Innovations, is being reviewed," I stated matter-of-factly. "You currently hold the title of Director of Digital Engagement with a salary of $175,000 plus benefits. Your direct supervisor described your performance as inconsistent and your attendance as problematic." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "That's Greg Miller. He's had it in for me since day one. Mr. Miller has been with the company for 12 years and oversees a team of 15 marketing professionals, all of whom meet or exceed their performance metrics. You are the only exception." "Because I'm a Williamson," he protested. "I shouldn't be judged by the same standards as regular employees." I raised an eyebrow. "That mentality is precisely why this company's performance has declined for 3 consecutive years. Merit matters, Ethan. Results matter. Family connections no longer guarantee employment." He paled slightly. "Are you firing me?" "I'm offering you a choice," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "Option 1, a standard severance package, 3 months salary and benefits continuation. Option 2, a probationary position as a marketing associate at an appropriate entry-level salary with clearly defined performance expectations." Marketing associate? That's like 5 steps down. And how much is an appropriate entry-level salary? $52,000 annually. The same as other employees with your level of experience and demonstrated skills. "That's barely enough for my car payment and apartment," he sputtered. "Then perhaps your lifestyle needs adjustment to match your actual value to the organization," I suggested calmly. "The choice is yours, Ethan. Severance or probation." He stared at me with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The Williamson safety net had suddenly vanished. "I'll take the associate position," he finally mumbled. "But my dad won't let this stand. None of them will. Your father and the other family executives no longer have decision-making authority. Here?" I reminded him. "Now, if you choose to stay, you'll report to Melissa Jenkins starting Monday. She's expecting you at 8:30 a.m. sharp." 8:30? But I never come in before 10. That was the old arrangement, I interrupted. Under new management, all employees are expected to adhere to the same standards. Your performance will be evaluated after 90 days, just like any other probationary employee. As Ethan left, visibly deflated, Sarah entered with an update. Richard Jr.'s daughter Sophie is next. She's in accounting. Unlike her cousin, Sophie Williamson actually possessed legitimate qualifications, an accounting degree, from a respectable university and CPA certification. Her personnel file showed solid technical skills undermined by an entitled attitude. When she entered, her expression was a careful neutral, more composed than her cousin had been. "Ms. Chen," she acknowledged stiffly. Or should I say, Mrs. Williamson? Ms. Chen is fine, I replied. Please, sit down. She perched on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands folded precisely in her lap. I assume I'm being terminated. Actually, no. Your technical skills and qualifications are valuable to this organization. Your supervisor reports that your work is thorough and accurate. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she controlled it. Then why am I here? Because there have been consistent complaints about your professional conduct. According to HR records, you've made 17 references to being a Williamson during workplace disagreements in the past year alone. 3 employees have requested transfers to avoid working directly with you. Sophie's cheeks flushed. That's taken out of context. I simply expected preferential treatment based on your family name. I finished for her. That ends today. Your employment offer includes your current salary and benefits, but with a 6-month probationary period focusing specifically on collaborative skills and professional conduct. And if I refuse? Standard severance and best wishes for your future endeavors. She studied me with narrowed eyes. Why would you want to keep any Williamsons employed here? Isn't this all about revenge for how the family treated you? This is about transforming a good company that's been badly managed into an excellent company with proper leadership, I corrected. Family names are irrelevant. Skills, work ethic, and contribution are what matter now. After a moment's consideration, Sophie nodded curtly. I'll accept the probationary position, not because I need it, but because I've invested 3 years here, and I won't let my family's mistakes erase my work. That's exactly the kind of perspective that might make you successful in the new organization, I noted. Your new supervisor will be Jackson Chen, no relation. He'll meet with you tomorrow to outline expectations. As Sophie left, I checked the time. 3 more Williamson family members to meet with today, including one I was particularly curious about, Richard Sr.'s youngest daughter, Catherine, who worked in the company's struggling sustainability division. Sarah returned with an update. Legal just called. The Williamson family attorneys are requesting an emergency injunction to halt the management changes. On what grounds? They're claiming corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty through your dual roles. Standard desperate tactics. Our counsel says it won't hold up. Everything was done through legal channels with proper corporate governance. I nodded, unsurprised. Have security keep an eye on the executive offices. Make sure no one removes company property or documents. And schedule a company-wide message for 4 p.m. Employees deserve to hear directly from me about what's happening. The afternoon continued in a blur of meetings. Some with Williamson family members whose employment was being restructured. Others with key executives who needed reassurance about the company's future direction. By 3:30, I had met with 5 Williamsons total. 2 had accepted reduced positions with probationary periods, 1 had taken severance, and 2 were still considering their options, which likely meant consulting family attorneys about legal challenges. Catherine Williamson, my final family meeting of the day, arrived precisely on time. Unlike her relatives, she'd requested to be scheduled at the end of the day to minimize disruption to her team's workflow. A small but telling detail. She entered the office with a direct, appraising gaze that reminded me of Eleanor's evaluating stare, but without the automatic disapproval. At 32, Catherine was the youngest of Richard Sr.'s children, and the only one who had pursued education outside the family's expectations, earning a master's degree in environmental science before reluctantly joining the family business. "Catherine, thank you for being punctual," I greeted her. "Please, have a seat." "I prefer Kate," she said, settling into the chair with none of the entitlement her relatives had displayed. "Only my mother calls me Catherine, usually when she's disappointed. In me." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Which is rather often." "Kate, then. I appreciate you waiting until the end of the day for this meeting." She shrugged slightly. "My team is finalizing an environmental impact assessment for the northern properties. Their work shouldn't be interrupted because of family drama." I studied, her with new interest. In all the family gatherings I'd attended as Elise, Kate had been notably scarce, always traveling for work, conducting field research, or otherwise occupied. The few times our paths had crossed, she'd been polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with the family's social politics. "Your personnel file is impressive," I noted. "Top of your class at Cornell, published research on sustainable forestry, practices, multiple certifications in environmental management. Yet you're buried in a division your father consistently underfunded, and your brother Thomas tried to eliminate entirely last year." Kate's expression remained carefully neutral. "The sustainability division was my condition for joining the company. Dad created it to lure me in after I turned down 3 previous job offers. It was never meant to have actual influence on operations, just a box to check for corporate social responsibility reports. And yet your team has produced remarkably thorough work, despite limited resources and active opposition from senior management." "We do what we can," she replied simply. "The field. Teams are dedicated professionals who believe in responsible resource management. They deserve better than being treated as corporate window dressing." I nodded, making a decision. "Kate, I'm dissolving the sustainability division effective immediately." Her face fell, though she quickly masked her disappointment. "I see. May I ask what will happen to my team?" "They're being reassigned, along with you, if you choose to stay, to the newly created Environmental Stewardship Department, which will report directly to the CEO and have oversight authority for all operations." Kate blinked, processing my words. "Oversight authority? You mean actual veto power over projects that don't meet sustainability standards?" "Exactly that. This company has hidden environmental violations for years while presenting a public image of responsibility. That ends now. I want genuine sustainable practices integrated into every aspect of operations, not siloed in an underfunded division that executives can ignore." "That's..." Kate seemed momentarily at a loss for words. "That's exactly what I've been advocating for 3 years." "I know. I read all your proposals, the ones Thomas buried and Richard Jr. mocked and your father dismissed as impractical idealism." She studied me with new intensity. "At the Christmas dinner last year, when you suggested sustainable forestry products and everyone laughed, you actually understood exactly what you were talking about, didn't you?" "I did," I acknowledged. "Just as I understood exactly how your family would react to a suggestion coming from Daniel's decorative wife." "God, they were awful to you," Kate said quietly. "I should have said something." "You weren't there. You had urgent field work. In Oregon, as I recall." "I schedule field work for every family gathering I can possibly avoid," she admitted with a wry smile. "Being the family disappointment gets exhausting after a while." "The environmentalist daughter in a family built on old-fashioned resource extraction," I observed. "I imagine that created tension." "That's putting it mildly. Dad called my degree advanced tree hugging. Thomas said I was betraying the family legacy. Only Mom supported my education, and that was mainly because an advanced degree made me more marriageable in her eyes." I made a decision. "Kate, I'd like to offer you the position of Chief Sustainability Officer, reporting directly to me, with a seat on the executive leadership team. Her eyebrows shot up. You're promoting me? Even after what my family has done? Even knowing I'm one of them? I'm offering a position to the most qualified person for a critical role, I corrected. Your family connections are irrelevant compared to your credentials, your demonstrated commitment to responsible forestry, and your detailed knowledge of this company's operations. Kate sat back, visibly processing the offer. My family will see this as a betrayal. Perhaps. But I suspect you've been navigating their disappointment for years. The question is whether you're prepared to help transform this company into what it could and should be, regardless of family politics. After a long moment, she nodded decisively. I accept. On one condition, I want authority to conduct a comprehensive environmental audit of all operations with complete transparency about historical violations. We can't move forward properly without addressing past damage. Agreed. I've already instructed legal to prepare for voluntary disclosure and remediation of known violations. Your audit will ensure we catch everything. As Kate left to inform her team about their expanded role, I turned to the large windows overlooking the city. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the urban landscape, a visual metaphor for the day's events that wasn't lost on me. Sarah entered with final updates before the company-wide address. Richard Sr. and Thomas have both issued statements to key clients attempting to undermine confidence in the transition. Our account teams are making direct contact to reassure them about operational continuity. And Daniel left the building about an hour ago. Security reports he took nothing but personal items from his office. The divorce papers were delivered to your former residence as scheduled. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The marriage had been a strategic decision that evolved into something more complicated. Not love, certainly, but a kind of familiarity that had become its own routine. Ending it brought neither satisfaction nor regret, just the clean finality of closing a chapter that had served its purpose. The auditorium is prepared for your address, Sarah continued. We're streaming it to all satellite offices and field operations as well. Approximately 85% of employees have indicated they'll attend either in person or virtually. And the press? Exactly as expected. Business journals are reporting a surprise management change at Williamson Timber. Financial analysts are speculating about the impact on stock price. Social media is buzzing with rumors, but nothing substantive, about your personal connection to the family yet. That would change soon enough. The Williamsons' pride might prevent them from publicly admitting they had been outmaneuvered, but gossip would inevitably spread through their social circles. I was prepared for that, had been prepared for 5 years. At precisely 4 p.m., I stood at the podium in the company auditorium, facing hundreds of employees whose professional lives had just been upended without warning. Their expressions ranged from fearful to curious to cautiously hopeful. Good afternoon, I began. I'm Alexandra Chen, and as of today, I am the CEO of what was formerly known as Williamson Timber Industries. I understand that today's changes have come as a shock to most of you, and you deserve both an explanation and clarity about the path forward. Over the next 20 minutes, I outlined the company's new direction, emphasizing operational excellence, environmental responsibility, and merit-based advancement. I acknowledged the company's proud history while being clear about the management failures that had undermined its potential. Most importantly, I assured employees that their jobs were secure unless they had been directly notified otherwise. This transition is about strengthening the company, not dismantling it, I explained. We need your expertise, your institutional knowledge, and your commitment to excellence. What we're changing is a culture that prioritized family connections, overcompetence and short-term profits over long-term sustainability. As I concluded the address, I noticed Kate standing at the back of the auditorium, arms crossed, listening intently. Her expression was thoughtful, evaluative, neither hostile nor automatically supportive. She would be an important ally in the transformation ahead, not because of her Williamson name, but despite it. The question and answer session that followed was predictably tense, with employees carefully testing the boundaries of what they could ask the mysterious new CEO who had appeared from nowhere to take control of their company. "What happens to the Williamson family members who work here?" one brave soul finally asked, voicing what many were wondering. "The same thing that happens to every employee," I replied evenly. "Their performance, skills, and contributions will be evaluated fairly. Those who meet expectations and embrace our new direction are welcome to remain and grow with the company. Those who cannot or will not adapt will be offered appropriate severance." "And the company name?" another employee asked. "Will it still be Williamson Timber?" "We'll be transitioning to Chen Forestry Innovations over the next 6 months," I explained. "This reflects both the change in ownership and our expanded focus beyond traditional timber products into sustainable forestry solutions and innovative building materials." By the time the session ended, I could sense a subtle shift in the room's energy, from fearful uncertainty to cautious optimism. Change was always uncomfortable, but many employees had long recognized the company's stagnation under Williamson leadership. The prospect of advancement based on merit rather than family connections represented opportunity for those who had been systematically overlooked. Back in my new office, as evening shadows lengthened across the city, Sarah brought me a surprisingly comprehensive security report. Eleanor Williamson attempted to access the executive floor twice this afternoon. Security denied entry as instructed. What was her stated purpose? First time, she claimed to have forgotten personal items in her husband's office. Second time, she demanded to speak with you directly about family matters. I could imagine Eleanor's imperious tone, her absolute certainty that her Williamson authority would override mere corporate security protocols. And Richard Sr.? Reportedly meeting with attorneys at the family estate. Several cousins and extended family members have been arriving throughout the afternoon. Family War Council, I observed. They'll be strategizing their response. Legal challenges, pressure on business partners, possibly attempts to undermine confidence in the transition. "We've prepared for all of that," Sarah reminded me. "Legal is standing by for injunction. Attempts. Account teams are proactively contacting all major clients, and PR has preemptive statements ready for every scenario we could anticipate." I nodded, satisfied with our preparation, but under no illusions about the battle ahead. The Williamsons had built their empire over generations, cultivating political connections and business relationships throughout the region. They would not surrender their perceived birthright without exhausting every possible avenue of resistance. "What about the Wellington Tract violations?" I asked, turning to more urgent operational matters. "Has legal made contact with the regulatory authorities?" "Yes, our Environmental Council has requested a voluntary compliance meeting for next week. Kate Williamson has already provided preliminary documentation and is working with the field teams on a comprehensive assessment." Good. I want full transparency on all environmental issues, even if it means higher short-term costs. We fix everything, properly and publicly. As Sarah left to coordinate the next day's priorities, I found myself alone in what had been Richard Sr.'s office for over 30 years. His presence lingered in the heavy furniture, the predictable hunting prints on the walls, the faint smell of cigars that even thorough cleaning couldn't quite eliminate. Tomorrow, this space would be completely redesigned. The dark mahogany, replaced with sustainable materials, the hunting trophies removed in favor of topographical maps of the company's managed forests, the closed-door opacity exchanged for literal and figurative transparency. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Daniel, you'll regret this. Family means everything in this town." I considered responding, then decided against it. Daniel's understanding of family had always been limited to the Williamson name, a weapon to wield against outsiders, a shield against consequences, a justification for entitlement. He had never grasped that true family was built on mutual respect and genuine support, not shared DNA and inherited privilege. Instead, I turned my attention to tomorrow's agenda: executive team meetings, operational reviews, and the critical task of identifying which employees at every level had been held back under Williamson leadership due to their ideas, gender, background, or unwillingness to participate in the family's culture of preferential treatment. My secure phone buzzed with an update from the surveillance team at the Williamson estate. Large gathering in progress. Approximately 30 family members present. Security increased at all entry points. I had expected this, the Williamson equivalent of a royal council during crisis. They would be plotting counter-strategies, assessing legal options, perhaps even considering direct appeals to business associates or political connections. What they wouldn't be doing, I suspected, was reflecting on how their own behavior had created the vulnerability I had exploited. As night fell over the city, I remained at my desk, reviewing operational data and preparing for the challenges ahead. The takeover itself had been executed flawlessly, but sustaining and building upon it would require constant vigilance. The Williamsons would be looking for any weakness, any opportunity to undermine my leadership or challenge my authority. Soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Kate Williamson stood in the doorway, a thick folder under her arm, her expression serious. "I thought you'd still be here," she said, entering without waiting for an invitation. "You should know that my family is gathering at the estate, all of them, even the ones who haven't spoken in years, united in outrage." "I'm aware," I replied. "Is that why you're here? Family loyalty?" She shook her head, placing the folder on my desk. "I'm here because you should see these before tomorrow. Complete environmental assessments of our 3 largest tracts, conducted by my team over the past year, and systematically buried by Thomas and Richard Jr. The violations are worse than you know." I opened the folder, scanning the executive. Summary with growing concern: illegal clear-cutting in protected watershed areas, toxic chemical runoff into streams feeding municipal water supplies, worker safety violations resulting in 3 unreported serious injuries. "This is extremely thorough," I noted, looking up at her, "and potentially devastating from a regulatory and financial perspective." "My team does good work when not actively sabotaged," Kate replied with a hint of pride. "There's a remediation plan included at the back. Expensive but comprehensive. It would demonstrate good faith to regulators and potentially mitigate the worst penalties." "Thank you for bringing this directly to me," I said, genuinely impressed by her professionalism. "Most of your family members are currently plotting how to remove me from leadership, not helping me address corporate liabilities." Kate leaned against the edge of the desk, studying me with frank curiosity. "I need to ask you something. Was any of it real, your marriage to Daniel, or was it all just corporate strategy from the beginning?" I considered deflecting the question, then decided honesty might be the better approach with this particular Williamson. It began as research into a potential acquisition target. Daniel was accessible, eager for validation outside his father's shadow. And later, after you were married, I intended to maintain the relationship only long enough to complete my due diligence on the company. But then I witnessed how the Williamson family operated from the inside, the casual cruelty, the environmental disregard, the systematic suppression of innovation. I met her gaze directly, including how they treated you and your sustainability initiatives. Kate's eyes widened slightly. "You were watching me?" I was watching everyone, evaluating which parts of the company were salvageable and which were hopelessly corrupted by family politics. Your division consistently produced excellent work despite active opposition from senior management. She was silent for a moment, processing this information. "So my promotion today wasn't about using a Williamson against her family?" It was about putting the most qualified person in a position critical to the company's future, I replied. Your last name is irrelevant compared to your credentials and demonstrated commitment. Kate straightened, retrieving a small business card from her pocket and placing it beside the environmental reports. My personal cell number. When my family makes their move, and they will, you may need an insider's perspective on their tactics. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, I understand why you did this. After watching my father and brothers drive this company toward disaster for years while ignoring every warning sign, someone had to stop them. I'm just sorry it came to this. After she left, I added her environmental reports to my priority review stack and contemplated the unexpected alliance. Kate Williamson represented something I hadn't fully anticipated. A family member whose loyalty to principles outweighed loyalty to the Williamson name. She would be valuable in the transition ahead, both for her technical expertise and for her insight into family dynamics. My phone buzzed again, another update from the Williamson estate surveillance team. Meeting concluded. Richard Sr., Thomas, and Richard Jr. departing separately with legal counsel. Multiple calls placed to business associates and political contacts. The counteroffensive was beginning. Tomorrow would bring legal challenges, attempts to undermine client confidence, perhaps even personal attacks once the full story of my marriage to Daniel inevitably leaked. I reviewed our defensive preparations one final time before leaving for the night. Every potential vulnerability had been addressed, every likely attack vector secured. The Williamsons would discover that their longtime immunity to consequences had finally expired. As I left what had been their company headquarters, for generations, I felt neither triumph nor vengeance, only the clear-eyed determination of someone with significant work ahead. The takeover had been perfectly executed, but the transformation was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new resistance, and the first true test of whether Williamson Timber Industries could be reshaped into the innovative, responsible company it should have been all along. In my car, driving toward the hotel suite that would be my temporary residence until more permanent arrangements could be made, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The path that had led me here had been complex, beginning with business strategy, evolving through personal awakening, and culminating in today's corporate restructuring. The Williamsons had never seen me coming because they had trained themselves to overlook anyone they deemed unimportant. Their blindness to my capabilities hadn't been a failure of intelligence, but a failure of perspective, the inevitable consequence of generations of entitlement and unchallenged authority. Tomorrow, they would begin to understand the full cost of that failure, and I would be ready. The Williamsons' counterattack began at precisely 8:17 the next morning, a coordinated offensive on multiple fronts, exactly as I had anticipated. 3 separate legal challenges filed simultaneously, Sarah reported, striding into my office with her ever-present tablet. Emergency injunction request claiming fraudulent acquisition, shareholder derivative suit, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, and personal suit from Daniel citing emotional distress and fraudulent misrepresentation. I accepted the coffee she handed me, reviewing the notifications from our legal team. All assigned to different judges? Yes. Their attorneys strategically selected judges with social connections to the Williamson family. Judge Harriman for the injunction request plays golf with Richard Sr. Judge Delaney attended the same prep school as Thomas. And our response? Already in motion. Legal has filed for consolidation of the business claims and recusal motions based on conflict of interest. The personal suit from Daniel will be handled separately. Our counsel recommends not dignifying it with an aggressive response yet. I nodded, unsurprised by the Williamsons' tactics. The legal challenges were merely the opening salvo, meant to create uncertainty while they pursued other angles of attack. What about business operations? Sarah's expression tightened slightly. The Williamsons have been busy. Richard Sr. and Thomas spent the night calling major clients. 4 have requested emergency meetings to discuss the transition. Richard Jr. contacted our banking partners, suggesting potential loan covenant violations due to the management change. Exactly as expected, I noted, mentally reviewing our countermeasures. Schedule the client meetings immediately, today if possible. Have finance prepare comprehensive covenant compliance documentation for the banks. And the employees? Mixed reactions. Some department heads loyal to the Williamsons are fostering uncertainty. HR reports elevated access to retirement account. Information and resume updating on company computers. Schedule a leadership roundtable for noon, all director level and above. I want to address their concerns directly. As Sarah left to implement these directives, Kate Williamson appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "Morning," she said without preamble. "You should know they've activated the nuclear option. Grandmother Eleanor is personally calling every society connection, business associate, and political contact in her considerable address book. The narrative is that you seduced Daniel as part of a calculated corporate espionage scheme." "Predictable," I replied. Though I question the strategy of publicly acknowledging their heir apparent was easily manipulated for 5 years. Kate's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Logical consistency has never been my family's strong suit when their pride is wounded. There's more. They're approaching your competitors with a proposition to fund a hostile counter-takeover." This was a development worth noting. Which competitors specifically? Atlas Forestry and Westridge Resources. Both declined, incidentally. Your reputation in the industry is apparently quite solid. I studied Kate thoughtfully. Her willingness to share family strategies represented a definitive break from Williamson solidarity. "You're taking a significant personal risk by briefing me on their plans." She shrugged, the gesture casual but her eyes serious. "Let's call it an investment in actual corporate governance over dynastic entitlement. The company deserves better than being driven into the ground by my family's ego and incompetence." After Kate left, the morning unfolded in a series of strategic responses to Williamson-initiated crises. Our legal team deftly handled the emergency injunction hearing, presenting irrefutable documentation of the legitimate share acquisitions that had given me controlling interest. The judge, despite his golf outings with Richard Sr., had no choice but to deny the emergency relief. The client meetings proved more challenging. Decades-long business relationships didn't shift easily, and the Williamson name carried weight in the industry. I met personally with the 4 largest accounts, addressing their concerns directly and outlining our vision for the company's future. "We understand your hesitation," I told the CEO of Henderson Building Supply, the company's oldest client relationship. "Change creates uncertainty. But I encourage you to evaluate our proposal on its merits rather than on family names or historical relationships." By noon, 2 of the 4 clients had reaffirmed their contracts. The other 2 remained non-committal, but agreed to delay any decisions until they had reviewed our formal transition plan. The leadership roundtable brought together 30 department directors and managers, many visibly uncomfortable with the rapid changes and uncertain where their loyalties should lie. "I understand your concerns," I began, looking around the conference table. "Many of you have long-standing relationships with the Williamson family. You're worried about showing loyalty to new leadership while avoiding burning bridges with influential people in this community." Several executives shifted uneasily in their seats, confirming my assessment. "Let me be clear. This company will now operate on merit, not relationships. Your performance and contribution will determine your future here, not your golf games with Richard Sr. or your children's playdates with Williamson grandchildren." I paused, letting this sink in before continuing. "This may represent a significant cultural shift for some of you. Change is always uncomfortable. But ask yourselves honestly, has the company been thriving under the previous leadership? Have innovations been encouraged or stifled? Have the most qualified people been promoted or the most connected?" The room remained silent. but I could. See thoughtful consideration replacing defensive wariness in many expressions. I'm not asking for personal loyalty, I concluded. I'm asking for professional commitment to building a stronger, more sustainable company. Those who share that commitment will thrive here, regardless of their past associations. Those who don't should consider whether their future lies elsewhere. By mid-afternoon, the initial shock of the transition was evolving into tentative acceptance throughout the organization. 3 executives had resigned, all close personal friends of Richard Sr. with questionable value to the company. Others were cautiously engaging with the new leadership team, testing the waters of a merit-based culture. My secure phone buzzed with a message from our surveillance team at the Williamson estate. Emergency Family Council reconvened. Eleanor leading discussion on social consequences strategy. I smiled slightly, imagining the scene, the family matriarch orchestrating the social ostracism of the woman who had dared usurp their corporate birthright. That strategy might have been devastating for Elise Williamson, the socially insecure wife seeking acceptance. For Alexandra Chen, CEO of a multinational corporation, it was irrelevant. Sarah appeared with the afternoon update. The court has consolidated the business-related lawsuits and assigned Judge Martinez no known connections to the Williamson family. Initial hearing scheduled for next week. The bank situation? Resolved. Our documentation satisfied all covenant requirements. The lending consortium has formally acknowledged the management transition without triggering any review clauses. I nodded, pleased with our progress, but under no illusions about the challenges ahead. Any updates from the field operations? Mixed. The Portland facility has fully aligned with the new management. Seattle is more resistant. The regional manager there is Richard Jr.'s brother-in-law. Send Kate Williamson to Seattle tomorrow, I decided. Her environmental expertise gives her a legitimate operational reason to visit, and her family name might help ease the transition. Follow up with a formal performance review of the regional manager next week. As Sarah left to implement these directives, my office phone rang, the private line few people had access to. The caller ID displayed Williamson residence. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then decided direct engagement might be more productive. Alexandra Chen speaking. This is Eleanor Williamson. Her voice was glacial, precisely modulated to convey aristocratic disapproval. I believe it's time we spoke directly, woman to woman. I agree, I replied calmly, though I suspect our perspectives differ significantly. Let me be blunt, Ms. Chen. You have perpetrated a fraud against my family using the most despicable methods imaginable. You've manipulated my son, stolen our company, and attempted to destroy a legacy built over generations. I've legally acquired controlling interest in an underperforming company and replaced ineffective leadership with competent management, I corrected. As for my marriage to Daniel, he pursued me quite enthusiastically, as I recall. Because you presented yourself as someone entirely different. Her composure cracked slightly. You created a fictional persona specifically designed to appeal to him. Did I? Or did Daniel simply see what he wanted to see? An attractive woman who wouldn't challenge his intellect or threaten his ego. I never claimed to be unintelligent or professionally unsuccessful. He assumed those things because they fit his preferred narrative. Eleanor's brief silence suggested this perspective hadn't occurred to her. What do you want, Ms. Chen? Money? Social position? What would it take for you to walk away and leave our family in peace? I want what I already have. Control of a company with excellent fundamentals that has been systematically mismanaged by entitled executives who prioritized family privilege over corporate performance. I intend to transform it into the organization it should have been all along. You'll regret making enemies of the Williamsons, Eleanor declared, ice returning to her tone. This community has respected our family for generations. One scheming outsider won't change that. Perhaps not, I acknowledged. But one scheming outsider has already changed who controls your family company. Social influence without economic power has limited shelf life, Eleanor. You might want to consider that before escalating this conflict further. After ending the call, I turned to find Kate standing in the doorway, an odd expression on her face. "Grandmother?" she guessed. I nodded, attempting to ascertain my price. "She's always believed everything and everyone has a price," Kate observed. "Part of her worldview, social position can purchase compliance." "And what about you?" I asked directly. "Do you have a price? Your family will certainly attempt to bring you back into the fold. A Williamson working closely with the usurper represents a significant crack in their united front." Kate considered this thoughtfully. "They already tried. My father called this morning, offering to fund my own environmental consulting firm if I resigned immediately. Thomas suggested I was betraying not just the family, but my late grandfather's entire legacy. Yet, you're still here. I'm still here because for the first time in my professional life, my expertise is being valued rather than tolerated. Because the company finally has leadership that takes environmental stewardship seriously." She smiled slightly. "And frankly, because watching my family face actual consequences for their behavior is surprisingly satisfying." As evening approached, I reviewed the day's developments with Sarah and the executive team. The initial Williamson counteroffensive had been largely contained, though we anticipated more sophisticated attacks in the coming days. "Their legal strategy is shifting," our chief counsel reported. "The new filing focuses on alleged violations of securities regulations during the acquisition process. They're claiming we failed to properly disclose beneficial ownership as shares were acquired through various investment vehicles." "Our disclosure documentation is meticulous," I replied. 5 years of carefully structured acquisitions, each properly reported according to SEC requirements." "Yes, but they're arguing that the fragmented purchasing through different entities constituted a coordinated strategy that should have triggered earlier disclosure requirements." I nodded, understanding their approach. "They're looking for technical violations to force a negotiated settlement. Continue our full compliance defense, but prepare contingency scenarios for various adverse rulings." As the meeting concluded, my secure phone buzzed with a notification I hadn't anticipated. "Daniel Williamson requesting access to main building. States personal property retrieval as purpose." I considered the request. Daniel posed no operational threat. His access credentials had been revoked, and security would escort him directly to his former office and back out. More importantly, denying such a basic courtesy would appear petty and vindictive, potentially generating sympathy for the Williamsons' position. "Approve the access," I instructed security. "Standard escort protocols." 30 minutes later, Sarah appeared in my doorway. "Daniel Williamson is asking to speak with you before he leaves. Security has confirmed he's collected only personal items from his office." I weighed the potential benefits and risks of such a meeting. "Send him in, but stay close." Daniel entered moments later, looking simultaneously haggard and defiant. Without his usual careful grooming and confident posture, he seemed smaller, somehow less substantial. "Alexandra," he said, testing the unfamiliar name. "Or do you prefer Elise? I'm not sure which is the real you anymore." "Alexandra is my birth name," I replied evenly. "Elise was a necessary adaptation for a specific environment." He laughed bitterly. "A necessary adaptation. That's one way to describe 5 years of marriage based on complete fiction." "Was it fiction, Daniel? Or simply selective presentation? You saw exactly what you wanted to see. A woman who wouldn't challenge your authority or question your decisions. Who would decorate your arm at social functions and never embarrass you with independent thoughts or ambitions?" "That's not—" he began, then stopped, perhaps recognizing the truth in my assessment. "I loved you," he said instead, his voice quieter. You love the idea of me, I corrected gently. The carefully curated version who existed to validate your self-image, not the actual person with her own mind and goals. He stared at me, really looking at me perhaps for the first time. I don't even know who that person is. No, you don't. That's rather the point. Daniel moved restlessly around the office, touching objects on the credenza, adjusting a chair angle, physical displacement of emotional discomfort. Why come after our company specifically? There are plenty of timber operations you could have acquired without the elaborate personal deception. It began as straightforward business research, I explained. Williamson Timber had strong fundamentals undermined by outdated management practices, an ideal acquisition target. The personal connection was initially just an efficient way to understand company culture. And later, after we were married? Later, I witnessed firsthand how your family operated, the environmental negligence, the systemic suppression of innovation, the casual cruelty toward anyone perceived as lesser. What had been a business opportunity became something more personal. Daniel flinched at casual cruelty, perhaps remembering specific instances. The family is fighting this with everything we have. You know that, right? Father has already called in favors from 2 state senators and a federal judge. I expected nothing less. It won't just be business pressure. Mother is systematically ensuring you'll be socially radioactive in this community. No charity board will accept you. No social invitation will be forthcoming. No club will consider your membership. I smiled slightly. Daniel, do you really believe? I orchestrated a complex corporate acquisition requiring 5 years of patience and precision because I crave Eleanor's social approval. He seemed genuinely puzzled by this perspective. Then what do you want? To transform a good company with strong potential into a great company with sustainable practices. To create an organization where advancement is based on merit rather than family connections. To build something that will outlast both of us. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing Alexandra Chen clearly for the first time. You're going to face resistance at every turn, not just from the family, but from an entire business community built on relationships and traditions. Yes, I agreed. Change is always difficult, especially for those who've benefited from the status quo, but necessary things often are difficult. As he turned to leave, Daniel paused at the door. I filed for an annulment rather than divorce. Claimed the entire marriage was based on fraudulent representation. A ghost of his old smirk appeared. Mother insisted, said divorce was too common. After he left, I stood at the window watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled. Daniel's visit had been illuminating, not for any new information, but for what it revealed about the Williamsons' fundamental inability to understand what had happened. They continued to frame events through their narrow social lens, unable to comprehend that their company had been vulnerable precisely because of their own complacent entitlement. My phone buzzed with an update from Kate. Regional managers at Seattle facility now fully aligned with transition plan. Environmental audit proceeding on schedule. Returning tomorrow morning. Small victories accumulating into larger momentum. Exactly as planned. The Williamsons would continue fighting, deploying every social, political, and legal resource at their disposal. Some battles they might even win, but the war for control of the company was already decided. Sarah appeared with final updates before I left for the evening. 4 more Williamson cousins in middle management have requested individual meetings to discuss their continued employment. Shall I schedule them for tomorrow? Yes. Evaluate each based on performance records and supervisor assessments, not family connections. And the press inquiries? The Financial Times and Wall Street Journal are both requesting interviews about the transition. Schedule them for next week, after we've announced the Comprehensive Sustainability Initiative. I want our first major public statement to focus on future direction, not ownership drama. 3 weeks later, I stood at the podium in the company auditorium once again, this time addressing a very different audience. The employees were there, of course, but so were environmental regulators, industry press, major clients, and community leaders, gathered for the formal announcement of Chen. Forestry Innovation's new corporate direction today marks not just a name change, but a fundamental shift in how we approach our business, I began, surveying the attentive crowd. For generations, this company has harvested timber as its primary focus. Moving forward, we will instead be stewards of forest ecosystems, developing innovative, sustainable products while ensuring these natural resources remain viable for generations to come. Kate Williamson stood to my right, poised to present the comprehensive environmental remediation plan her team had developed. 5 other Williamsons, cousins and extended family members with genuine skills and adaptability, had found places in the restructured organization, each now evaluated on their actual contributions rather than their last name. In the third row, Eleanor Williamson sat stone-faced beside Richard Sr., their presence a calculated demonstration that they couldn't be excluded from major community events, regardless of corporate ownership changes. The social war continued, with daily skirmishes in country club dining rooms and charity board meetings. But its relevance diminished with each successful business quarter under new leadership. The legal challenges had been largely resolved, most dismissed outright, 2 settled with minor financial penalties for technical disclosure issues during the acquisition process. Daniel's personal suit had been withdrawn after his lawyers explained the potential embarrassment of detailed discovery proceedings. We face significant challenges, I continued, outlining the substantial environmental remediation costs and operational changes ahead. But we also have unprecedented opportunities. Our new research division is already developing carbon-neutral building materials that outperform traditional lumber in key metrics. Our sustainable forestry practices are setting industry standards that others will soon be required to follow. As I detailed the company's new direction, I caught Kate's approving nod from the side of the stage. In 3 short weeks, she had transformed from reluctant Williamson to enthusiastic change agent, her environmental expertise finally receiving the recognition and resources it deserved. The auditorium lights glinted off my grandmother's jade pendant, now worn openly as a symbol of my actual heritage rather than hidden to avoid Eleanor's disapproval. The journey from Elise Williamson to Alexandra Chen had been long and complex, requiring patience and precision that few would understand. In conclusion, I stated, wrapping up my presentation, this company's future will be defined not by its past ownership, but by its ongoing commitment to innovation, sustainability, and genuine value creation. Those principles will guide every decision we make moving forward. As applause filled the auditorium, I noticed Eleanor whispering something to Richard Sr., her expression sour but resigned. The Williamson era was ending not with the dramatic confrontation they had expected, but with the steady, inexorable implementation of a new vision they couldn't prevent. Some battles simply couldn't be won with social connections and family influence. Some transformations occurred despite the resistance of those who had benefited from the previous order. The Williamsons were learning this lesson daily as their corporation, their century-old family legacy, evolved into something they could neither control nor claim credit for. Later that evening, as I reviewed the day's developments in my office, Kate appeared in the doorway, a bottle of champagne in one hand, 2 glasses in the other. "I think this calls for a celebration," she said, entering without waiting for an invitation. The sustainability initiative announcement was a massive success. Even the industry skeptics are taking notice. I smiled, accepting the glass she offered. "Your environmental remediation plan was particularly well received. The regulators seemed genuinely impressed by the comprehensive approach." Amazing what can happen when environmental stewardship is treated as a core business function rather than an inconvenient regulatory burden. She raised her glass. "To the future of Chen Forestry Innovations. And to discovering unlikely allies in unexpected places," I added, touching my glass to hers. Kate sipped her champagne thoughtfully. I should tell you, I had Sunday dinner at the family estate yesterday. Quite the experience being the designated traitor at the Williamson table. I can imagine. Grandmother Eleanor has now decided I was corrupted by liberal education and requires intervention. Father vacillates between fury at my betrayal and awkward attempts to extract corporate intelligence from me. She smiled wryly. Thomas simply pretends I don't exist. And you're comfortable with this position? Between two worlds? Kate considered the question seriously. I'm comfortable with my choices. The family will eventually adjust or they won't. Either way, I'm exactly where I should be professionally for the first time in my career. After she left, I stood at the window watching the city below, reflecting on the transformation of the past month. The takeover had succeeded beyond my most careful projections, not just in corporate control, but in fundamental cultural change throughout the organization. The Williamsons would continue their rearguard action for months, perhaps years. Legal challenges, social pressure, attempts to undermine client relationships. But the momentum had shifted irreversibly. What had been Williamson Timber Industries for generations was now Chen Forestry Innovations in more than just name. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Daniel again. Mother insists I attend the Simpson Charity Gala next week. Will you be there? I smiled slightly at the implied social challenge. Eleanor was testing boundaries, using Daniel as her proxy in the ongoing campaign to reclaim some measure of control. My response was simple. Yes, with Kate as my guest. Setting the phone aside, I returned to reviewing operational plans for the coming quarter. The social maneuvering would continue indefinitely, but it was ultimately irrelevant to the work that mattered, transforming a stagnating company into an innovative leader, replacing entitlement with merit, and building something sustainable in every sense of the word. The Williamson family had spent generations believing their name alone conferred value and authority. In their world, social position trumped competence, tradition outweighed innovation, and appearance always mattered more than substance. They never understood that their greatest vulnerability lay in that very belief, the complacent certainty that they could recognize threats only from those who matched their definition of power. It had been their fatal mistake to dismiss the quiet woman at their dinner table, the one they mockingly advised to focus on redecorating the sunroom rather than offering business suggestions. The one they laughed at for failing job interviews that were actually corporate intelligence gathering. The one they saw as decorative rather than functional. Alexandra Chen, once invisible to them as Elise Williamson, now controlled their family legacy. And perhaps that was the perfect justice. They had lost everything precisely because they couldn't see beyond their own limited perspective. The company would thrive. The Williamsons would adjust or they wouldn't. Either way, the transformation they had never imagined possible was already irreversibly underway. Sometimes revenge wasn't about destruction, but about creation, building something better from foundations that had been corrupted by generations of entitlement and complacency. And sometimes, the most satisfying revenge was simply becoming exactly who you truly were, after years of being underestimated by those who never bothered to look beyond their own assumptions. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.